She looked at me the way people look at a wet floor sign. Useful enough to register, not worth remembering. I was standing 6 feet from the operating theater door with my paramedic bag still strapped across my chest, and Dr. Vanessa Cahill was already turning away before I finished my first sentence. "There's a tamponade presentation," I said. "The bleed isn't arterial. You're chasing the wrong source." She stopped walking, turned back, looked at me once, at my jacket, at the municipal patch on my shoulder, at the dried blood on my left forearm that wasn't mine. "Who let him in here?" she said to no one in particular. Then, to me, "Sir, this is a restricted surgical floor. Whatever you think you saw downstairs, I promise you our team has it managed." 40 minutes, I said. "She's been on that table 40 minutes, and the pressure is still dropping." "Security," she called down the hall. Not loudly. The way a person calls for something they've already decided on. I did not argue. I had learned a long time ago that arguing with a closed door only costs you the seconds you needed to find another way in. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. My name is Daniel Reyes. I am 39 years old. I have been a paramedic for 14 years. The last 6 of them on the overnight rotation for District 7 in a city that does not sleep and does not slow down and does not apologize for either. I drive a truck with 180,000 miles on it. I own 2 good pairs of boots because the job destroys footwear and there's no point pretending otherwise. I have a 9-year-old daughter named Iris who has her mother's eyes and my stubbornness in equal measure, which means she's going to be formidable when she grows up, and I think about that on the hard nights when I need something solid to hold on to. Her mother, Sophia, died 22 months ago. Ovarian cancer, caught late, moved fast. We had been together since we were 23. She taught 3rd grade. She made excellent coffee and terrible pasta, and she never once let me feel like the harder parts of our life were more than we could carry together. When she was gone, I spent about 3 weeks being a person who could barely function, and then Iris came into the kitchen one morning, put a bowl of cereal in front of me, and said, "Dad, we still have to eat breakfast." She was 7 years old. She said it the way a foreman says it on the first day back after a long shutdown. Just a fact. Just the next thing. So we ate breakfast. And then the next day, we ate breakfast again. And that became the shape of things. I drop Iris at school every morning at 7:40. She has a spot at the base of the school steps where she likes to stop and adjust her backpack before she goes in, even when it doesn't need adjusting. I wait until she's through the door before I leave. Some mornings she turns around and waves. Some mornings she doesn't because she's 9 and she's thinking about something else, and I wave anyway because it's not about whether she sees it. On the morning this story is really about, she handed me a folded piece of paper at the gate. "Open it later," she said. "When you need it." I put it in my breast pocket. I had learned not to ask Iris for context she had decided to withhold. District 7 runs its overnight rotation from Station House on Clement Street, 3 blocks from the hospital and 8 blocks from Iris's school, which is the only reason I took this particular assignment when my old supervisor offered it to me 2 years ago. The proximity, the ability to feel, even at 3 in the morning when the radio is going and the city is doing what cities do in the dark, that Iris and I are separated by 8 walkable blocks and not by something larger and less crossable. My partner on the overnight is a woman named Carmen, who has been a paramedic for 22 years and has the particular patience of someone who has seen everything at least twice and has stopped being surprised by most of it. She makes fun of my coffee thermos, which is cracked on one side and leaks a small amount onto my jacket if I hold it at the wrong angle. I have not replaced it because Sophia gave it to me, and I am aware that this is irrational and I have no plans to change. We caught the call at 6:17 in the morning. Female patient, 34 years old, collapsed in the lobby of her office building on the north end of the financial district. Bystanders reported she had been conscious initially, complained of sudden severe abdominal pain, and then lost consciousness within 4 minutes of onset. By the time we arrived, she was on her back on the marble floor of a building lobby with a crowd of office workers in a ring around her and one security guard performing chest compressions with the form of someone who had taken a certification course once and was trying hard to remember it. I took over compressions. Carmen got the airway. The woman's name, from her building ID clipped to her blazer, was Michelle Tanaka. She was 34. She worked on the 11th floor of a financial firm whose logo was on the lanyard. She had on earrings that were the kind you wear on a day when you have something important, a meeting, a presentation, something worth dressing for. She was the color of paper. I ran her pressure, 62/40 and falling. Abdomen rigid on palpation, distended on the right lateral side. The pattern of it, the rate of deterioration, the way the rigidity was localized rather than diffuse, the absent bowel sounds on the right, the skin color, and a particular quality to her breathing that I had encountered only a handful of times before, it assembled into something specific in my mind the way patterns do when you have run enough calls in the dark and paid attention to all of them. I said to Carmen, "Give me the 4-line and start a wide-open saline push. She needs the or in the next 20 minutes, or she's not going to make it." Carmen did not need to be told twice. Carmen had been watching the same patient I had. We moved fast. The ambulance to St. Augustine's Medical Center took 4 minutes. I was on the radio before we left the lobby, calling ahead to the trauma bay, giving the presentation, giving the numbers, giving what I was thinking without saying it was what I was thinking, because on a radio call you report findings, not conclusions, and you let the receiving team draw their own picture. The trauma bay at St. Augustine's received us the way good trauma bays receive you. Fast, organized, everyone in position. They took Michelle Tanaka onto their gurney, and I gave the handoff to the receiving nurse in under 90 seconds, vitals, timeline, interventions, the palpation findings, all of it. Then the senior trauma physician, a man named Dr. Ellison, who I had handed patients to 30 or 40 times over the years, looked at the numbers and said they were taking her surgery. I said, "The presentation is consistent with a hepatic rupture with secondary cardiac tamponade. The pressure drop is too fast for a straight hemorrhage pattern. If they go in looking for a standard bleed, they may miss the pericardial component until it's too late." Dr. Ellison was already moving. He looked back once. "We'll take it from here, Reyes." I understood what that meant. I had handed off the patient. My jurisdiction ended at the trauma bay door. That was how it worked, and there were good reasons for it, and I believe in the structure of those reasons even when the structure felt wrong. I went back to the ambulance. Carmen was cleaning the bay. I stood outside on the ramp with my hand in my jacket pockets and looked at the sky, which was doing the early morning thing it does in late autumn, where the light comes in gray and thin and makes everything look like the hour before something happens. "You okay?" Carmen said from inside. "She's going to the ER without the right picture," I said. Carmen was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You told them." "I told Ellison." "Then you told them." I stood on the ramp for another minute. Then I went back inside and started writing the call report. 22 minutes later, my radio went off. Not a dispatch. A direct call from inside the hospital, routed to my unit, which was not standard. It was a charge nurse named Rita, who I had known for 6 years, who spoke to me in the flat, controlled voice of someone managing a situation that was getting away from them. "Reyes," she said, "the patient you brought in, they're in the ER. 40 minutes in, and they cannot get the bleeding controlled. Pressure is crashing. They have the surgical chief in there now, and 2 more attendings, and nobody can figure out why the standard interventions aren't working." I sat with that for 1 second. "Rita," I said, "is Dr. Cahill running a room?" A pause. "Yes." Vanessa Cahill was the chief of trauma surgery at St. Augustine's. She had trained at Johns Hopkins and done a fellowship at the Mayo Clinic and had a wall of credentials that nobody in that building ever thought to question. She was 46, precise, and in every professional interaction I had ever observed her in, she carried herself with the posture of someone who had never once considered that the most useful piece of information in the room might be coming from outside the room. I had handed off patients to her team 8 times in 6 years. I had offered observations twice. Both times she had received them with the particular courtesy of a person who was already discarding what they were hearing. I pulled the call report I had been filling out. I looked at the timeline. 40 minutes in the ER with the pressure still dropping meant they were managing the hepatic bleed and missing the secondary component entirely. The pericardial effusion, if that's what it was, would be compressing the heart from the outside, and no amount of surgical control of the abdominal bleed would stop the pressure from falling. because the problem wasn't only where they were looking. I said to Carmen, "I'm going back in." She looked at me. "They're not going to let you into the or, Daniel." "No," I said, "but I'm going back in." She handed me the spare gloves from the side panel without another word. That was Carmen. She had 22 years of knowing when to argue and when to just hand someone the gloves. The surgical floor at St. Augustine's is on the 4th level. I had been up there twice before in circumstances that were not standard, and both times I had used the staff elevator near the east loading dock because it was slower and less monitored and bought a person the 30 seconds needed to move through a space without being intercepted. I took it now. The 4th floor smelled the way surgical floors always smell, clean past the point of comfort, antiseptic and recirculated air, and the faint metallic edge of space where the body's interior is regularly made exterior. The hallway outside the main or suite had a cluster of people I recognized from a distance. 2 nurses, an anesthesia tech, and a scrub tech who had stepped out, all of them in the particular stance of people who were waiting for news that was not coming fast enough. At the end of the corridor, Dr. Vanessa Cahill was standing outside the ER doors with a tablet in her hand, and the controlled expression of a person managing a situation that was actively worsening. Beside her was a man I didn't recognize, another surgeon from his scrubs, and 2 medical residents who were listening with the attention of people who understood that something was going wrong and were not sure yet what role they were supposed to play in it. I walked toward them at a pace that was direct without being fast, because running on a surgical floor draws attention before you need it, and I needed 30 more seconds than running would allow me. Cahill saw me when I was 10 feet away. Her expression did not change initially. Then she registered the jacket, the patch, the fact that I was not supposed to be on this floor, and her expression changed in the specific way it changes when someone arrives somewhere they're not supposed to be, and the person in authority has to decide in real time how to handle it. "Mr. Reyes," she said. She remembered my name, which surprised me slightly. "This is a restricted area. You've handed off your patient. Whatever you believe you observe in the field, I can assure you our team is managing the clinical picture." The 2 residents looked at me. The other surgeon looked at me. The nurses at the far end of the corridor looked at me. I said, "Her pressure has been dropping for 40 minutes with full surgical intervention. The hepatic bleed is not the primary driver. She has a pericardial effusion compressing the right ventricle. The tamponade is why the standard protocol isn't working." Cahill looked at me with the expression of a person who had just been given a diagnosis by the man who cleans the floors. "The patient was thoroughly assessed on arrival," she said. "Her echocardiogram on intake did not show pericardial involvement. She was an early-stage accumulation on intake," I said. 40 minutes of surgical manipulation and hemorrhagic pressure change will have progressed it. You need a bedside echo in that room right now." "Security," she said. Not loudly. I had known she was going to say it. I had been standing in the hallway outside or knowing she was going to say it, and I had come anyway because the alternative was going back to the ambulance and writing a call report while a 34-year-old woman in good earrings died on a table 4 floors above me. I reached into my breast pocket, not for a credential, not for a certification card, for the piece of paper Iris had given me at the school gate that morning, the one she told me to open when I needed it. I unfolded it in the hallway outside while 2 security guards came around the corner from the stairwell door, and Dr. Vanessa Cahill stood with her tablet and her credentials and her 40 surgical years and waited for me to be removed from her floor. It was a drawing. Iris's drawings were always specific. She had decided at some point that art should be specific, and this one was no different. A figure in a blue jacket kneeling beside a smaller figure on the ground. Around them, a crowd of other figures taller in white coats standing in a ring. And at the bottom, in her handwriting, which was getting better every month, "Dad always finds what everyone else missed." I folded it. I put it back in my pocket. I looked at Dr. Cahill. "Run the echo," I said. "If I'm wrong, I'll walk out of here and you'll never see me on this floor again. If I'm right, she has about 10 minutes. The security guards were on my shoulders. Cahill had not given them the word yet. She was looking at me with something that was not yet a decision, but was getting close to one. And then from inside the through the closed double doors, a monitor alarm went off. The sound carried into the hallway, with the flat authority of a machine reporting exactly what it measured. And what it measured was a pressure reading that had crossed below the line where the body can sustain its own function. Cahill looked at the doors. She looked at me. She said 2 words to the security guards. "Stand down." Then she pushed through the doors without looking back. I followed her in. The ER was cold the way operating rooms are always cold, a deliberate cold, maintained for the equipment and the concentration of the people inside it. There were 6 surgeons at the table, which was 2 more than standard, and the fact that there were 6 told me everything I needed to know about how the last 40 minutes had gone. More hands called and meant the hands already there had run out of answers. The anesthesiologist was a man named Dr. Park, who I had never met, but whose body language in the next 4 seconds told me he had been watching the monitor numbers for the last 10 minutes with the specific attention of someone who had stopped believing the current approach was going to turn the corner. Michelle Tanaka was on the table under the lights with her chest open and her abdomen packed, and 6 pairs of gloved hands, and none of it was enough. Cahill moved to the table. She did not announce me to the room. She said to the circulating nurse, "Give me the portable echo. Now." Then she looked at the surgeon directly across from her, a man whose eyes above his mask registered surprise, and then something harder to read. "We may have a tamponade component. We're going to look." The surgeon said. Her intake echo was clean. "That was 42 minutes ago," Cahill said. The portable echocardiogram unit was wheeled in from the corner of the room in under 60 seconds. The sonographer who operated it moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who had run emergency bedside echoes before and understood that the word emergency meant exactly what it said. I stood against the wall near the door. A scrub tech looked at me once with the expression of a person trying to determine the correct response to an anomaly, and then looked back at the table, because the table was where everything that mattered was happening. The echo probe went to the subxiphoid window. The image came up on the portable screen, and the room went quiet in the way rooms go quiet when a picture says the thing that no one has been able to say for 42 minutes. The pericardial effusion was visible as a dark crescent around the right ventricle. The fluid had accumulated in the space surrounding the heart and was compressing the chamber from the outside with every beat, and the right ventricle was working against that pressure with diminishing efficiency. And that was why the blood pressure had been falling on a table full of surgeons who were doing everything correctly for a problem that was not the problem. Cahill looked at the image for 3 seconds. She said, "Pericardiocentesis. Give me an 18-gauge needle." She did it herself. Guided by the echo, she advanced the needle into the pericardial space and drew back the syringe, and the fluid came, dark and collected, 43 milliliters of it before the pressure in the chamber began to resolve. The monitor changed. The number climbed, slowly at first, then, with more conviction, the way a tide comes in, not dramatically, but with the certainty of something that has decided on its direction. Dr. Park said, from behind his mask, "Pressure is coming up. 78/50. 81. The room exhaled, not loudly. The controlled exhale of 6 people who had been holding something for 42 minutes and had just been allowed to put it down. Cahill secured the pericardial drain. The team returned to the abdominal repair with the focused competence that had been there all along, doing now what they had been trained to do in conditions that would finally let the training work. I stayed against the wall. I had no place at that table, and I did not try to take one. I had come in with one piece of information, and it had been the piece that mattered. And now the people who were supposed to close this were closing it. And that was exactly how it was supposed to go. 20 minutes later, the monitor held steady at 94/62 and climbing. Michelle Tanaka was not out of the woods. She would spend the next several hours in that room and the next several days in the ICU and the weeks after that in a recovery that would be slow and specific and would require the patience of a person who did not yet know how close it had been. But she was on the right side of the line, and 45 minutes earlier she had not been. Cahill stepped back from the table. She looked across the room at me. She said, to the room and to no one in particular, "Someone get him a chair." Nobody moved immediately. Then the circulating nurse pulled a rolling stool from beside the supply cart and placed it near the wall where I was standing. I sat on it. My legs were tired in a way I had not noticed until I stopped standing. The surgery closed 2 hours and 17 minutes after I walked through those doors. I was there for all of it, on the stool against the wall, because no one asked me to leave and I did not offer to go. I watched Kale work. She was good. She was genuinely, observably good in the way that some surgeons are good, with an economy of motion and a quality of attention that communicated itself to everyone else at the table, and I understood watching her why she held the position she held and why the people around her deferred to her judgment in every room except the one where the judgment had been wrong. When they wheeled Michelle Tanaka to the ICU, I stood up and stretched and looked for the nearest waste bin to drop my gloves. Cahill pulled off her own gloves at the scrub sink. The other surgeons filtered out. The room filled with the after-surgery sounds of a space being reset. Cahill turned from the sink. She looked at me across the empty room. "How did you know?" she said. I told her. The palpation finding in the lobby, the rigidity pattern, the rate of pressure drop against the volume of the presenting hemorrhage, the specific quality of the right-sided distension. I told her about the one other case in my 14 years where I had seen the same combination, a construction worker, 31 years old, blunt force trauma, same presentation, same cascade. I had caught at that time in the ambulance bay and said something to the receiving physician, and that physician had listened and the man had lived. I did not tell her about the other time. The time before that, earlier in my career when I had seen something similar and had not said anything because I was 26 and the attending physician was a man with 30 years of experience and the kind of certainty that makes a young paramedic swallow what he knows and defer to what he is supposed to defer to. That patient had not made it. Her name was Lisa Carver, and she was 41, and I had thought about her on and off for 8 years in the specific way you think about the things you cannot undo. Sophia, in the last year of her life, when she was lucid and we were talking the way sick people and the people who love them talk when they have both stopped pretending there is unlimited time, had asked me once why I pushed so hard in situations where other paramedics stepped back. I had told her about Lisa Carver. She had been quiet for a moment, and then she had said, "That's not guilt, Daniel. That's conscience. Those are different things, and you should know the difference." I thought about that now, standing in the cold of the OR, while Cahill looked at me with an expression that was working through something I could not fully read. She said, "The intake assessment was thorough. I reviewed it myself." "I know," I said. "It was thorough for a standard presentation. This wasn't standard." She was quiet. She was not a person who was comfortable with silence. I could see that she filled professional space the way people fill it when silence has never been safe for them, with activity, with speech, with the forward motion of someone who learned early that stillness invites scrutiny. But she was quiet now. She said, "You should have been allowed to say this 2 hours ago." "I tried," I said, without heat. It was a fact, not an accusation. Another silence. Then she said something I did not expect. "My mother was a nurse," she said. "Floor nurse, 30 years. She used to say the most dangerous thing in medicine is the physician who stopped listening to the person closest to the patient." She looked at the doors. I became a surgeon. I stopped hearing that the way she meant it. She said it to the room, not specifically to me, the way people say things that are too honest to be addressed to a particular face. She turned back. She said, "I'd like to speak with you this afternoon, if you're willing." I said I was willing. I found Carmen in the hospital cafeteria on the ground floor, drinking bad coffee with the patient contentment of a person who had been waiting for a specific amount of time and had decided in advance to be fine with it. She looked at me when I sat down. She looked at the expression on my face. She said, "She's okay." "She's okay," I said. Carmen nodded once. She pushed her coffee toward me. I took it and drank it, even though it was bad, because I had been on my feet since 5 in the morning and the body asks for what it needs without caring much about quality. I pulled out my phone and sent a message to Iris's school letting them know pickup would be the aftercare program today. I did this every time a call ran long. It was the system we had worked out, Iris and I, for the mornings when the job went beyond where the job was supposed to end. She had a bag packed in her cubby at aftercare with a change of clothes and a book and a small bag of crackers because she did not like the aftercare snacks, and she had arranged this herself at the start of the school year with the efficiency of a person who had decided that the uncertainty in her life was best managed by preparing for it concretely. I thought about that, sitting in the cafeteria with bad coffee, about what it costs a 9-year-old to develop that kind of practical self-sufficiency, about the specific price of having a parent whose job meant that any given morning could become a different kind of day without notice. Iris had paid that price without complaint, and she would keep paying it, and I carried that knowledge the way I carried most of the harder things, not buried, but in a specific pocket of awareness that I checked in on regularly to make sure I hadn't let it go numb. I reached into my breast pocket and unfolded the drawing again. The figure in the blue jacket, kneeling. The ring of white coats. Dad always finds what everyone else missed. She had drawn it that morning. Before the call. Before any of it. I did not know how to account for that except to say that Iris had always known things slightly ahead of when they were supposed to be known, and I had stopped trying to explain it and started simply paying attention to it. The meeting with Cahill was in her office on the 3rd floor at 2 in the afternoon. Her office was the office of a person who worked in it rather than performed in it. The desk had stacks of actual paper on it. There was a whiteboard on one wall covered in clinical notation. The single personal item I could see was a framed photograph on the shelf behind her, a woman in nurse's scrubs, older, laughing at something off camera. Her mother, I assumed. She sat across from me without the authority posture of the surgical floor. She looked tired in the way people look tired when they have been keeping something at a distance all day and have finally allowed it to arrive. She said, "I looked up your service record before you came up." I waited. 14 years, she said. Commendations in 2017 and 2020. No disciplinary record. A note from a Dr. Ellison in your file from 2019 describing you as one of the 3 best field assessors he'd encountered in 20 years of emergency medicine. She paused. I didn't know that this morning. It wouldn't have changed anything this morning, I said. Not unkindly. She took that. No, she said. It wouldn't have. She folded her hands on the desk. She said, the paramedic to surgeon communication protocol in this hospital is inadequate. I've known that for 2 years, and I've prioritized other things. What happened today in that hallway was partly a failure of protocol and partly a failure of my own assumptions about where useful clinical information comes from. She said it in the direct, undecorated way of someone who had decided to dispense with the usual professional softening. I'm not telling you this as an apology, she said. I'm telling you because I'm going to change the protocol, and I want the person who demonstrated the gap to know the gap is being addressed. I looked at her. I said, Michelle Tanaka has 2 kids. I saw the photo on her building ID lanyard. 6 and 8 years old. Cahill was quiet. I'm not telling you that for any particular reason, I said. I just think it's useful to know who was on the table. She looked at the photograph on her shelf behind me. She looked back. She said, "What do you want, Mr. Reyes? Professionally, what is it that you actually want to be doing?" The question landed with a weight I had not anticipated because it was a question I had not been asked in a long time, and the last person who had asked it was Sophia, 3 years before she got sick, sitting at our kitchen table on a Sunday morning with the window light coming in, and both of us still young enough to believe the answer had room to move. I said, "I want to be where the gap is, whatever that means." Cahill nodded slowly. She said, "There's a position in our pre-hospital liaison program. It's been unfilled for 8 months. It requires someone with field experience who can interface between paramedic units and surgical intake to improve the clinical handoff. The salary is different from your current rate." She named a number. I said nothing for a moment. She said, "It also requires a certification course, which the hospital funds." I said, "I have a daughter. My schedule has to be predictable enough that she has a parent who shows up." "The position is day rotation," she said. "Fixed hours. The predictability is part of the design." I sat with that. Outside the window behind her, the city was doing its afternoon thing, traffic and light, and the particular noise of a place that runs on itself without needing permission. I said, "I'll think about it." She said, "That's fair." She stood. I stood. At the door, she said, "The patient, Michelle Tanaka. Her family arrived an hour ago. Her husband and her 2 children." She paused. The 6-year-old asked the ICU nurse if the person who found what was wrong was a superhero. She said it without sentiment. She was not a sentimental person, and she was not performing sentiment now. She was just passing along a fact. She said, the nurse didn't know what to tell her. I picked up Iris from aftercare at 5:47. She was the last kid in the room, sitting at the craft table with a book open and a half-finished drawing beside it. The drawing was a horse. I could tell it was a horse because Iris had been drawing horses with increasing accuracy for the past 4 months. She looked up when I came in. She closed the book. She did not ask how the day had gone because she was 9 and she could read a room, and the room on my face told her something had happened and that it had ended where it needed to end. She picked up her bag. At the door, she took my hand, the way she did sometimes still when she forgot she was trying to be older than she was. She said, "Did you open it?" "I opened it," I said. She nodded, satisfied, the way a person nods when something they arrange has come out correctly. We walked to the truck. The evening was cold, the good autumn cold that has a clarity to it, and the street lights were coming on in the way they come on in October, earlier than you expect, reminding you that the year is further along than you realized. I strapped her in. I got it on my side. I sat for a moment before I started the engine. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. Iris said, from the back seat, without looking up from the horse drawing she had brought with her, Mrs. Kim said you're allowed to feel 2 things at the same time. Mrs. Kim was her school counselor, who Iris had been seeing monthly since Sophia died, and whose observations Iris relayed to me periodically with the solemnity of a person transmitting dispatches from a trusted source. 3 weeks after that morning, I accepted the position. The paperwork took 4 days. The certification course started on a Monday. I drove to the hospital in the same truck with the same cracked thermos and parked in the staff lot on the north side of the building, which was a different lot from the one the ambulances used, and I sat in the cab for a moment before I went in, the way I always sat before things that were beginning. Iris had asked me the night before if the new job meant I would still pick her up. I said yes. She said same time. I said same time. She went back to her horse drawing. That was the whole negotiation. The pre-hospital liaison office was a room on the 2nd floor with a window that faced the ambulance bay. I could see the ramp from my desk. I could see the paramedics running their handoffs, the fast transfer of information at the threshold between the field and the building, the gap I'd spent 14 years standing in without a name for it. Now I had a name for it. Now it was the job. Kale stopped by the office on my 3rd day. She did not make an occasion of it. She stood in the doorway with a coffee and said the first protocol revision had gone to the department heads that morning. She said there had been pushback from 2 of them, and she had addressed the pushback and the revision was moving forward. I said that was good. She said, Michelle Tanaka was discharged yesterday. I looked up from the desk. She walked out, Cahill said, under her own power. Her husband was there. Both kids. She said it the same way she had said everything that mattered, without decoration, letting the fact carry its own weight. She left without further ceremony. That was her way, and I had come to understand it was not coldness. It was the same thing I did when I put important things in a breast pocket instead of saying them out loud. Everyone had their particular way of holding what they could not afford to drop. I went back to the protocol document open on my screen. Outside the window, an ambulance came up the ramp, and 2 paramedics moved with the fast economy of people who understood that every second in a handoff is load-bearing. I watched them the way I had watched Cahill work in the OR, with the specific attention of someone who knows what they are looking at. At 3:40, I closed the laptop and took the elevator down and walked out through the main entrance onto the pavement. The afternoon was cold and bright. I turned toward the school. Iris was on the steps when I got there, adjusting her backpack the way she always did. She looked up. She did not wave. She just waited the way she had always waited, certain I was coming. I was always coming. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you love this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story. What 2 things? I said. Sad that Mom isn't here, she said. And glad that you are. She said it the way she said things that were important to her, without looking up from what her hands were doing, as though the eye contact would make it into something bigger than she wanted it to be. I started the engine. I pulled out of the parking spot. The truck's heater came on with the familiar low rattle of 180,000 miles. I said, "Mrs. Kim is right." Iris said, "I know. That's why I told you." We drove home through the early evening with the heater running and the city going past the windows and the horse drawing getting more detailed in the back seat. And I thought about Michelle Tanaka's 6-year-old asking if the person who found what was wrong was a superhero. I thought about what Sophia would have said about that question if she had been sitting where I was sitting. She would have said something exact and true and probably a little funny, the way she always found a version of things that was simultaneously lighter and more honest than the obvious one. I didn't know the right answer to that question, but I knew that tomorrow morning I would make 2 eggs and fill the cracked thermos and walk Iris to the gate and wait until she was through the door, and whatever happened after that, the day would have started correctly. That was the whole of the structure. The rest was just showing up.